Welcome, everyone. My name is Katie Wyatt. I'm the president and CEO of El Sistema USA. Really excited. Oh, it's on the wrong slide. Sorry, just a moment. Now it's on the right slide. Look at that pivot. Hi, let's begin again. I'm Katie Wyatt. I'm the president and CEO of El Sistema USA. Thank you so much for joining us for our midweek keynote with Dalanie Harris. Dalanie is an alumni of YOLA, Youth Orchestra Los Angeles, and the Harmony Project. She is also an alumni of the Eastman School of Music. She is the founder of Classically Black Podcast. And this session and her talk is sponsored by C&J Associates, which stands for Kalita Nicole Jones Associates. Kalita is a board member for El Sistema USA and is the principal of her consulting agency, and would love the chance to speak with you. Thank you so much to Kalita for sponsoring today's session. We're going to hear from Dalanie, and then we'll have an interactive question and answer session led by Angelica Cortez. Angelica is also a member of the board of directors of El Sistema USA, and she is the new program manager of Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at the Juilliard School. I know we're all excited to hear from Dalanie, so without any further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Miss Dalanie Harris. Thank you, Dalanie.
Thank you. Hi everyone. My name is Dalanie Harris. I'm a double bassist, a podcaster, a writer, and an advocate for Black music. I call myself an advocate for Black music because, in a lot of ways, I was steeped in Black music growing up, and it wasn't until later on when my scope of the music world shifted, primarily when I went to college, that I realized that there were areas in which there needed to be someone actively advocating for Black music. So I wasn't totally aware of this because I grew up surrounded by and participating in one of the most deep-rooted musical traditions of Black America, gospel music. I grew up in the church, going to choir practice on weeknights, being forced to do solos when they knew good and well I couldn't sing. Some of y'all know what I'm talking about. Anyway, from this, I started studying piano with a woman from my church. My mom would take me and my sister to Sister Ash's house, and we would go half on a piano lesson. My sister does like maybe 30 minutes, and then I do mine. And this is when I was first introduced to what many of us know as classical music. This is where I began to learn names like Haydn, Bach, Mozart, and when I'm in situations like this one, in which I'm speaking to people who work and operate within the classical music space, this is also the point in time in my life that I usually refer to as the beginning of my musical training. And to be honest, I didn't even notice that until fairly recently. And the reason for this is directly tied to the trajectory of my musical career beyond this point. So I moved on from piano because I simply could not stand it. And soon after, I began playing the bass in the Los Angeles Philharmonic's Youth Orchestra Los Angeles and Harmony Project when I was in the 7th grade. So these programs are responsible for a lot of my foundation as a classical musician, especially when it came to some of the aspects that would make or break my ability to access higher education in the institution I graduated from, like private lessons and things like that. And while they were an important aspect of my musicianship, there was actually another ensemble that I was involved with through high school called the Inner City Youth Orchestra of Los Angeles. And what was different about this ensemble was, yeah, I played a lot of the same music that I was playing elsewhere, but I also got to play, tribute concerts to Black artists, popular artists. Anyone who knows me knows Stevie Wonder is my favorite artist of all time. We did Stevie Wonder tribute, a Luther Vandross tribute, a Michael Jackson tribute, Motown, Aretha Franklin, all of that. And I was able to do that in orchestra, and that was kind of my first taste of bridging the gap. But like I said, I was still playing vast majority classical music. So my scope of classical music and what it meant to be an excellent musician still didn't change. It wasn't that I didn't think that the music of my people was excellent, but I had essentially been compartmentalizing it in a way that separated it from my classical training. Hence why I used to describe my introduction to classical music as the beginning of my musical career. So when I went away to college at the Eastman School of Music, I began to experience a sort of call to consciousness in waves. When I first got there, I experienced a level of culture shock that was out of this world. I grew up in Inglewood, California, so I was surrounded by Black folks. My teachers were Black, my church was Black, my neighbors were Black, my mailman was Black, my doctor was Black. And although I had been heavily immersed in the classical music world in the years leading up to college, it soon became very clear to me that the classical music world that I had become accustomed to was very different than the one that I had just walked into. So before Eastman, the fact that I was in an overwhelmingly white dominated field was clouded by the fact that A, although the music I played was overwhelmingly white, the people who I played that music with were not. And B, literally every other aspect of my life allowed me to embrace myself and my culture in ways that came naturally to me. But when I went away to college, that balance was completely thrown off. My classical music side, along with all the ideas that I had about what being an excellent musician meant, became a much bigger part of my life by default. And that exposed a lot of discrepancies to me. It exposed gaps in my own knowledge about classical music in comparison to my peers. At the time, at my Eastman audition, when I got the form you're supposed to fill out, and they asked you to make your instrument, I was like, how am I supposed to know who made this? Like in my head though, my soon-to-be professor who I was auditioning for, he got it straightened out. He let me know how I'm supposed to know who made it. But it also exposed me to the fact that not only were people not familiar with my culture in classical music, but there were many cases in which it was looked down upon. And that caused me to turn inward and shut out a lot of things during my first few semesters in college. In February of my sophomore year in college, I traveled to Detroit to attend the Sphinx Connect conference. And in the process, I met two people. First, I met a now good friend of mine, Richard, who was getting his PhD in music theory at Eastman. We met in the Rochester airport while we were waiting for our flight. So we recognized each other as Eastman students. We struck up a conversation. That was that. We get to Detroit and make eye contact with somebody who looks familiar, a baggage claim. Now, if you listen to my show, then you've heard this story just about a million times. But in February of 2018, a year and a half after we both arrived on the same campus to go to school, I met Katie Brown, who is now a friend of mine, a business partner, and can most accurately be described as my partner in choice. But then we were just three Black students who had been operating in our own separate corners of our school because there was no connectivity for Black students, even within the same building. Well, as many of you know, 9 months later, Katie and I launched Classically Black podcast, and also Richard was a huge part of that behind the scenes. He designed both of our logos, and he did our promotional photos. He stuck it out with us through 3 locations and 2 outfit changes, so a real one. The concept for Classically Black was not only to create a space where Black classical musicians could feel connected to each other regardless of where they were, but also to address the dichotomy between Blackness and classical in the classical music world that I, as well as many others like me, have been grappling with. And as we began using Classically Black as a platform to draw connections between Black culture and classical music, I also began to see the ways in which these two things were already connected. Hosting Classically Black instilled in me a sense of responsibility to bring more Black perspectives from within classical music to our listeners, in addition to the connections that we were making to popular culture. Identifying and learning more about these perspectives took a lot of independent research. And the next wave of my call to consciousness came when I realized that it shouldn't have. I was at what was considered to be an elite institution that trained and produced musicians at a very high level and prepared them for excellence. And so realizing that nothing about what Black composers had done was included in this idea of excellence was a hard pill to swallow. And an even harder one was realizing that fundamentally, this was the exact same way that my classical music education had always been structured. This wasn't something that began all of a sudden when I went to college. So I decided, hey, can't change the past, but I can begin to make changes for myself going forward because this had been going on for far too long and I had no time to waste. So from that point forward, I would do all that I could to supplement my education with material that would close this gap. This included continuing my work with Class B Black, starting the Black Students Union on campus, but it also included a very strict rule that I made for myself after a particular experience in music history class. So I'm sitting here learning about what Mozart had for breakfast on his 16th birthday or something like that. I don't know. And I'm looking at the dates on the projector, and I just keep staring at them. And it's not that I didn't know what was going on in America during this time. It's just that Black history and classical music had never been put in conversation with each other in front of me before. So that compartmentalization that I had in my brain never allowed me to see the overlap. And we also pretty much never talk about classical music in America until after the abolition of slavery. And don't get me wrong, I know it was popping in Vienna in the 18th century, like I get that. But once I realized the overlap, everything I was learning, all the little cute composer fun facts and the ins and outs of their lives, truly felt irrelevant to me. So I decided, okay, if I'm ever given the opportunity to shape my own assignment or curriculum or a project in class, I don't care what type of mental gymnastics I got to do to make it work, I will research and write about Black people in classical music. I refused to contribute any more effort, brain power, or scholarship to canonize composers that was not absolutely required of me because I knew if I didn't do this for myself, that no one else would. So the main places opportunity presented itself was in my music history curriculum. Every now and then, I was tasked with coming up with my own essay prompt or research project, and I had to prepare myself to go to the library, walk past the countless shelves of books on the top 12 reasons Beethoven hated the color yellow in order to scrounge up what research I could find to fit the parameters of my project. This process of taking back my education was a very interesting one, coming from the world of being a performer, because in so many situations, not much is asked of you outside of learn how to play this and play it well. This approach may seem harmless to most people, as on the surface, it might just look like a way to prioritize musical excellence or technical proficiency. But in reality, we have a way of whitewashing classical music not just by creating a hierarchy of composers that's based on ideals rooted in white supremacy, but also stripping it of all social and political context, particularly if that context can be seen as too topical. If things become too topical, we begin to hear things like music transcends race, music will heal all wounds, and just focus on the music and that other stuff matters. And it's crazy because some of y'all favorite composers were not just focusing on the music. They were literally writing works in response to events and circumstances and even specific people in their country's leadership. So these statements are what I call classical music escapism. It's a form of toxic positivity that essentially hinders progress by attempting to divert attention away from issues that can be seen as controversial. And these controversial issues usually have something to do, if not everything to do, with the systems and structures on the stage, in the classroom, or behind the scenes that are not inclusive of or equitable for musicians who are not white. And the laser focus on musical excellence only having to do with how well you execute something or how extensively you know the standard repertoire is, in my opinion, such a cop-out. Because although some may feel as though music transcends race, for me, stressors around race were often exacerbated by my involvement in classical music because of the ways in which the field refused to acknowledge the part it's actively played in maintaining racist structures. And that leads me to the last couple of things that I want to leave y'all with in an attempt to be more solution oriented. Unfortunately, a lot of folks call themselves trying to be solution oriented without the essential first step, which is accountability. I know it can't be easy to unpack your personal musical journey or your journey as an organization and identify the ways in which you may have contributed to upholding standards of excellence that promote the erasure of the experience of Black musicians. I mean, I'm sure that sentence alone made a couple of people's necks get hot, but y'all heard my journey. Y'all heard how nearly every step of the way I had epiphanies and teachable moments and things to unpack. We all got unlearning to do, but an important step is that we move past incrementalism and engage in that unlearning expeditiously. I was recently watching a talk that involved a few arts leaders in this field, one of which was saying all the right things about what they'd like to see in the future, up until the point of being asked what they would do moving forward. Then the conversation shifted to, well, we just gotta have patience. We gotta be kind, everybody be nice, very, 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 very nice. Just remember patience, remember that number one thing, this, that, and the third, whatever. So me being me, I said, all right, bet. I'm gonna get on Beyonce's internet and see how long this particular organization has been around. So imagine my surprise when I go over to Google and I see 1900. I said, oh no, not the turn of the century. The turn of the century? That's how much patience do you need? There's a James Baldwin quote in a video, if you just Google it, of him asking how much time do you need for progress and whose time? Because it took my grandmother's time, it took my mother's time, it's taking my time. How much more time? Um, and now, of course, I know this particular person was not around in 1900, but what I do know is that actions will tell you a very accurate story about priorities. And as someone working within your organization, you should be able to infer from the state that it was in when you got there, how much of a priority equity was for those who were there before you, and adjust accordingly. Because although there's a lot to unpack, continuing business as usual is a choice. In fact, it's a series of choices that we make every single day. I looked at the state of classical music, and because of that, I made an active decision to shift my priorities and my criteria for excellence so that it always includes engaging in unapologetic advocacy for those who have not had a place here. So you don't need to wait on your next aha moment. This is your call to consciousness. And as educators, you all hold such a unique power to not only embody these changes, but to support future generations of musicians who will no longer see equity as a goal, but a requirement and a reality. So I hope to see that moving forward. That is one of my biggest hopes and goals for classical music. And I'm so glad to be here today and to be able to share that with you all. And thank you for sticking it out with me through this talk and through all the support that I've gotten from Classically Black and Sistema USA and all of our partners and things. Thank you.
I'll pause for the uproaring applause that's happening that we can't hear, but we know is happening. Thank you so much, Dalanie. That was fantastic. And again, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Cortez, currently working at the Juilliard School, but have been part of the school of Dalanie Harris for 6 years now. We worked together when we were at YOLA. So thanks, Dalanie, for taking some time to answer some questions. So I'll kick us off with some questions, but if anyone has questions for Dalanie, please feel free to drop those in the chat as well. So Dalanie, just to start off, I want to start out with this idea of that you talked about with compartmentalizing, right? Different types of musics. And I think one thing that's being talked about more in classical music specifically is incorporating more Black composers, which is great. But I think a bigger point that you're pointing toward is that, you heard Stevie Wonder separate from classical music, separate from gospel music. How can we as programs start to decompartmentalize some of those musics? How can we start to incorporate different types of music? Why is that important? And also, I'm curious to hear you talk about like, what are some ways that we can do that as inclusively as possible?
Yeah, I think it's a doozy in classical music, because it's not just when it comes to programming, it's also just like a lot of the culture of classical music is not very receptive to incorporating like other genres and things like that. Um, something that I really enjoyed about my time playing music, like soul music and things like that in orchestra, was that I got to learn about the people behind the scenes in that sort of music industry. So when I played the Aretha Franklin tribute, something that I learned was about an orchestrator named H.B. Barnum, who is like quite literally a living legend, and I don't know why everyone does not know his name. Um, he is orchestrated for Aretha Franklin, for Michael Jackson, Diana Ross, like literally almost every like Motown artist in their prime. Um, and just learning about how these connections already exist, I was really fortunate to have an opportunity for, to be in an ensemble that brought him in to kind of bridge that gap, to take all this music that we had grown up listening to, in the backseat of our, our mother's cars, and show that, hey, there is a connection here. There's a lineage of Black people, not only in classical music, but also there is a lineage of Black people who bridge gaps in that way. So I think involving people who have a history of doing this work is so important, because I think that in the hype of getting of wanting to make all these changes, people think they know what's best and they feel as though there's no one doing it. And the reality is, like, there's been so many people who may not have a $12 million budget, but like have been on the ground, engaging in this work for so long. And so I really think it's important to, give those people their shine, and also give them the support to do what they've been doing, but with the financial means. Obviously, H.B. Barnum has worked with so many amazing artists, so he got the means. But like, there are other people, who engage in this work like pretty frequently, and I think that sometimes it's important to know your role in that, and sometimes it's a role of support.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think too, what you were pointing to toward the beginning of what you were saying about sort of how we define excellence, right? And how we define how classical music specifically and how we learn classical music aids us in our defining of what is excellence, means that we have to compartmentalize things. One thing that you and Katie have talked about quite a bit, and you talked a bit about this at Sphinx, was the idea that we are actually limiting our students when we put this particular frame on them. So can you talk a little bit about that? Can you talk a little bit about how you think, or some of the skill sets, I guess, that you think our students are missing out on because of that frame?
Yeah, and I know that this is a huge debate going on in the music theory world. Thankfully, I've graduated, so I've been delivered from the conversations about music theory. But you know, there are some things that, like, Katie and I both joke about this. I'll be like, I'm a one-trick pony. I need notes on a page. Like, that's how I play music. But like, there's something behind that. It's like I was not prepared to do anything else. Like, and so, one of the things that terrifies me the most in the world is improvisation. Like literally. So that's, a huge thing, and also the ability to look at other types of music for what they are is a huge aspect of that. And that goes into looking at how other like cultures define music. Like, I know that we have our own in our own like music theory curriculum. We have, how we the different aspects of music that we look at, and understanding that those aspects and that frame does not just transfer to what everyone else does. And you can't just take that and look at something else and judge it based off of how we judge, Western European music. So, and a common example that we bring up a lot on Classically Black, because Katie and I both we both listen to a lot of gospel music, and we also both listen to a lot of rap music. And on rap music, a lot of what you hear from classical musicians is that, well, there's three aspects to music, and that's melody, harmony, and rhythm, and rap only has one of them, only has rhythm. First of all, it's not true. But second of all, you know, there are other if you even just engage with people who write about hip hop, or who study it, whether that's in the academy or not, um, you will be able to see very clearly what aspects they're looking for when they or listening for when they hear the music. And it's not always the same things that we are listening for. And um and a lot of people feel that same way about classical music. They feel like uh Katie and I did a little series called Put Me On, where we talked to people who were not classical musicians, and we tried to put them on classical music based on their musical interests that they already had. And a lot of, it was really difficult to bridge that gap with the amount of like rhythm that people were used to hearing, especially people who listen to a lot of rap music. And because we kind of both had that, we had both of those interests, both classical and rap. Like, we can kind of like hop over and like whatever, and kind of create that for ourselves. But I think those are two things, like the improvisation thing, and also just being able to transfer your your scope and your outlook on music to other types of music, and appreciate them for what they are.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's some real serious questions in and around like why we aren't giving students a skill set to analyze lyrics, right? And why we aren't giving students, so to your point, lots of opportunity there. So I'm going to switch gears just a little bit and go toward something that you mentioned in your chat around culture shock, right? And I think that that's something that certainly I've heard a lot of YOLA students experience as they move on, either to conservatory or college, right? That there's a bit of a culture shock experience. I'm wondering if you have any advice, in addition to, diversifying repertoire, diversifying our curriculum. What else can our programs and our teachers and our leaders do to kind of help students with the gap and the bridge between high school and college?
So, and it's I would say that I'm a huge advocate for demanding more from your educational institutions that you pay so much money to go to. And I think that, sometimes that's very intimidating as a student to do. So if there were more support there, that would, more institutional support, as much as can be given from programs, that would be great. And what I mean by that is, I was in a position where I made Classically Black. Katie and I made Classically Black. I established a Black Students Union. I wrote bylaws to our Students Association Constitution in order to put a Black Students Union even in the realm of possibility. And I should not have had to do any of those things. And so I think that there's a certain amount of pressure that needs to be applied across rungs on that ladder, across different sections of the pipeline. And it's not just like you go off and do, you send students off and, send them to wherever they're going, and that's it. I think that there's a certain level of support that can be provided from, institutions that carry weight to students. Like, hey, we have a student coming here, see that you're not supporting the Black students that already go here. So what are you going to do to, change that?
Yeah.
But
that's fantastic. That's super great advice. Thanks, Dalanie. I'm gonna transfer now over to some of the questions that we're seeing come in, and I'll just call out to Katie if you think I'm missing any, please feel free to hop in. But one that's in here from Luke is, what new role, if any, do you think traditional canonized music should play in our programs, if at all?
I mean, I am also a strong advocate for a reformative curriculum rather than additive curriculum. I think especially on the in some of the spaces that I've been in, they're like, okay, so what can we put on top of what we're already doing? And like, how can we add to this? And so do I think that, you know, these the canonized composers and works should not be included? No, because you know, I think that there is a degree of value there, but I do think that there is also much more than that, a level of understanding that a lot of the what's in the canon was put there, you know, not based on what people believe it was based on. I think that, you know, if that's going to be a part of it, I think it's okay to include it as sort of a bridge to kind of connecting students to, you know, music education in other genres, or just things that will connect to their culture. The reason why I say that is because a lot of music programs, Sistema inspired programs, even if their goal is not to produce musicians who will go off to conservatory, a lot of the, you know, a lot of them do, and I feel like more and more of them are. Um, and, you know, unfortunately, until conservatories get on board and orchestras get on board, there's a certain, I guess, degree of knowledge that students are required to have of that sort of thing. So that's a difficult thing to kind of grapple with, like how to balance that. Um, and I also think that's another reason why that, like, across the bridge sort of conversation needs to happen, because it's like, yeah, you can tell your kids, okay, we're not doing anything from the canon, like bump all of that, we're going to do all of this stuff, and then they get to conservatory and they feel super super out of place, because, you know, they're expected to just know all of this stuff that they don't know, and so that's not, you know, advocacy for us to only teach the canon. That's advocacy for us to say, hey, conservatories, you kind of need to get on your job and make this change with us instead of us adjusting to what you've been doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a matter of many institutions kind of demanding that, right? Because it's a lot of onus, I think, to put on you, Dalanie, as an individual, to go and create all the bylaws that you need to do, create the Black Student Union, create that, right? So I think that that's a really important call to the organizations that we're working with here. There was a question too about if there are particular organizations or places or people that you think are doing work in the right line. Like, where would you point people toward if they're looking for some inspiration in terms of folks kind of getting this right?
Mm-hmm. I can't speak to the longevity of this, but in the vein of immediate action, one of the institutions that I saw that took immediate action was the Manhattan School of Music, where it was not just, hey, we don't stand for racism and then continuing to stand for racism after that. It was like, hey, we don't stand for racism and here's all the things that we're doing to prove that. Like, right. So there's that. There's also an educator by the name of Jacqueline Costin. She has a program, the acronym is YOUTH, and it's a Youth Orchestra of Urban Towns and Hoods. And they do a lot of like West African music theory and classical music. I think they're primarily, or they might only be strings right now. But yeah, they've just introduced a West African music theory program, and they do a lot of work with incorporating, just music from the diaspora into a string curriculum. So those are two that I, just off the top of my head.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Another question that came in is like, what are some of the things that programs can do like immediately to start to kind of close those gaps? And obviously, some of this is like not immediate. We can't, change all these things like right away, I think is something that comes up in conversation really quickly. But from your perspective, are there immediate things that we could do to close some of the gaps that you're talking about?
Yeah, I feel like people get really caught up in what's coming next, and they feel like they don't have time to adjust for that, when in reality I feel like a lot of us do things last minute anyway, so I don't really know where that's coming from.
Yeah.
So I think apart from connecting with educators that already do the work, there's a lot that is accessible from Black composers. There are a lot of other ways to get in contact. Another one that I'll say is blackclassicalmusiceducators.com, which is a friend of mine, Jasmine Dakan, who created this platform for Black classical music educators to to be accessible and to be on one place. So I think seeking out platforms like that is like a very immediate way to be able to do that, because like you can literally email these people from her website, and there's such a broad range of talent on there across genres. Yeah, it's Black classical music educators, but as we know, so many musicians have other interests, and have diversified themselves in different ways. So I think there's a level of collaboration that needs to be done in the meantime, while people revamp while people restructure their whole operation, because I understand that takes time. Some things do. So I think a level of collaboration on a long I guess like period of time. So instead of like a one-off thing, maybe it's a residency. Maybe you let someone take, um, not, not maybe like control, but like maybe you let someone, have that agency over an aspect of your program, to show you things and teach you things that have not really been presented to your students before, and see how that goes. I think that a lot of things just get lost in the sauce when they just happen once and never happen again. And so I think it's important to observe the people who have been doing this work for a while, and how they maintain that, especially because they're almost powerhouses by definition, because they've been able to maintain that in a field that is structured in a way that does not lend itself to them going against the grain. So yeah, I just can't stress that enough.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Okay, so there's another question in here, and I think this ties back to a little bit to the conversation that we were having about kind of how we learn music and how we learn music theory, how we learn music history. There's a question about, do you think a shift in decentering Western music notation would help open up curriculum and help us shift more toward inclusion? So that's really specifically about how we learn how to write music. I'd love to hear you talk about that. And just to give a little bit more context to folks, I think Dalanie and I were speaking a little bit shorthand about Philip Ewell and the kind of debate that's going around with Philip Ewell. So I'm happy to put that into the chat as well while Dalanie answers that question.
Yeah, although I think there are so many people who are like better qualified to answer that than me, because I'm just like, nah. The music theory is just not my bag, like at all. But like I said, growing up in the church, that is something that kind of came back around in my mind when I had that realization that I was not counting that as a part of my music education. Was that I never saw sheet music learning learning choir music. And so I definitely think it's possible, and I don't know the pedagogical ins and outs of what that does. I think church musicians in their minds and their ability to adjust and just all of that is super super fascinating. So maybe that is a place to go for like more detail on that, because I know there are some church musicians who play for years and then they're like, okay, I want to, I'll learn how to read music now, like for something. So, you know, that's a sort of interesting aspect of that. So, and I don't want to underestimate also the power and the significance of like oral training. So, and I do think that it makes you a stronger musician. But I can't really speak to like how like centering that over musical notation would.
Yeah. Right, absolutely. Yeah, and I think there is something to say about the sort of language that and the vocabulary that Western music notation gives us. But to your point, there's a lot of questions around how to kind of reanalyze that and give us new tools for communicating across various cultures. So I know that we're running close up against time. Maybe the last question that you can answer and leave us with, Dalanie, is you mentioned having us sort of start to analyze and think about our own musical journey. What are some of the other questions that you want us to leave here with? What else should we be asking ourselves as we try to push our field more toward equity?
I think something that needs to be, and I don't know if this is like an actual, like a specific question, but putting more weight in questioning the decisions you make outside of like actual music, like, programming choices. I think there's a lot of focus there and there needs to be a lot of focus there. However, there have been so many times where I've made decisions about like I was planning something, and just the way that I structured it, I was just like, wow, the conservatory education really jumped out. Like I was like very much like just aspects of how my mind works in prioritizing some musical skills over others. Like those were things that I had to unlearn in my mind. Not necessarily the whole thing with the classical music rap thing, because I didn't do that because I like them both. But just some of the things that I learned about even competition, about I don't know, like how like practice habits, like just and even like what it takes to climb the ladder as a classical musician. I wasn't really questioning those things as much um, as was necessary in my collaboration with other musicians who have been in this longer than I have, and in this fight longer than I have, has really opened my mind to that. And they've been kind of like, girl, did you catch that? And I was like, okay, let me go back and and think about that. There's a lot of issues in classical music that affect everyone, that are on top of all of these issues. And then even though they affect everyone, they may disproportionately affect Black students. Things that have to do with practice habits, that have to do with associating your proficiency on your instrument to your self-worth. Like, and we all know that there are, you know, socioeconomic issues that have to do with where or how quickly you advance in classical music and those sort of things. And so like when those two things get together, it can be like a total disaster for like your mental health and things like that. So I do think that there definitely needs to be more of an interrogation of just our habits in the field in general, both on and off stage.
Fantastic. Great. Thanks, Dalanie. I'll go ahead and pass it back over to Katie.
Dalanie, I hope that you felt the warmth coming at you from the Zoom screen. Thank you so much for sharing your message with us. I am confident that this is going to lead to a lot of conversations amongst ourselves and hopefully with you, to continue these conversations with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to turn it over to Trina Christensen, the 2021 Virtual Symposium and Seminario Committee Chair.
Thank you so much. And Dalanie, love your message. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Just a couple of announcements, you guys. As you know, it's Wednesday, time for another giveaway. Hooray! It's courtesy of the practice shop. It's a prize package. So to enter the giveaway, you will want to go to the Let's Talk About It section on SwapCart and click on the giveaways tab, put your first and last name and program name. We will be announcing the winner at our networking cocktail hour. Of course, we need to celebrate even though we're virtual, so please come. It's at 8 p.m. Eastern, and we will be hearing from the organization Niman and the amazing work that they are doing. So thank you for joining us. Our next sessions happen at 2:30, so we have a little bit of a break. Get up, stretch your legs. We have fundraising through a crisis. And then we have our World Ensemble ambassadors who are doing a session on the magic of music mentoring around the world. And some of the ambassadors are joining us for a live Q&A. Again, thank you so very much, and we wish you a wonderful day.